On a stormy afternoon, while most were seeking shelter from the rain, Braden found himself helping an elderly woman navigate the slippery sidewalks of their suburban neighborhood. What seemed like a simple act of kindness quickly turned into a bewildering nightmare for the teenager. Just hours after escorting her home safely, Braden was confronted by the police at his doorstep, accused by the very same woman he had helped. On that stormy afternoon, Braden hadn't planned on doing anything heroic. He was simply returning from the local grocery store when he spotted the elderly woman, her frail frame battling both the wind and the rain. Offering her his arm, he guided her carefully along the slippery sidewalk. It seemed like nothing more than a good deed at the time, but nothing could have prepared him for what it would lead to. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Whitlock, lived alone in a house that looked as old as she did. Its walls were lined with pictures of people who seemed long gone. "Thank you, dear," she said, her voice quavering, as they reached her porch. Braden smiled, reassured her he was happy to help, and began his walk home. Hours later, the harsh ring of the doorbell echoed through Braden's house, disrupting the quiet evening. His mother answered the door to find two police officers in uniform. Braden, overhearing his name, stepped forward, his stomach knotting as the officers asked him to step outside. "Braden Foster?" one of the officers asked sternly. He nodded, his mind racing. "You are accused of theft and elder abuse by Mrs. Eleanor Whitlock," the officer continued, his eyes searching Braden's face for any sign of guilt. Braden's jaw dropped in disbelief. "But I just helped her home," Braden protested immediately. The officers didn't seem convinced. "We need you to come with us to discuss these accusations formally," the other officer said. "Let's get you to the station so you can give an official statement." A mix of fear and confusion churned in Braden's gut as he glanced back at his worried mother. At the station, Braden repeated his side of the story to a detective who scribbled notes without looking up. "Mrs. Whitlock claims a valuable item went missing after your visit," the detective finally said, his expression unreadable. Braden felt his frustration mounting. "I didn't even go inside her house," he insisted. But the detective just nodded, urging him to continue. After giving the police his official statement, Braden was free to go home. Back at home, unable to sleep and haunted by the day's events, Braden scoured the internet for any information on Mrs. Whitlock. His search revealed little until he stumbled upon an obituary of a man in his town with the same last name, labeled a prominent businessman and philanthropist. The connections weren't clear, but the seed of curiosity was planted. The next day at school, Braden couldn't focus. He kept replaying the events, wondering if he had missed a sign, a clue at her house that something was amiss. During lunch, he shared his turmoil with his best friend, Jenna. "You should go back there," she suggested. "Maybe you'll find something that can clear your name." Reluctant but desperate to find a solution, Braden walked back to Mrs. Whitlock's neighborhood after school. The house looked different in the daylight, less ominous, but just as old and secretive. As he approached, he noticed the numerous garden gnomes. Each seemed to stare at him, tracking him as he walked to the front door. He knocked, heart thumping, uncertain, but needing answers. No answer. Braden called out, but the house remained silent. Peering through the window of the old house, he could see the outline of furniture covered with sheets, as if no one had lived there for years. Confusion turned to alarm. Had Mrs. Whitlock really lived here, or had he been set up from the start? Pacing the sidewalk, Braden dialed Jenna's number. The phone rang twice before she answered, her voice a comforting sound in the chaos of his thoughts. Jenna. The house was empty, like no one's been there for years. Everything was covered, silent. "It's freaking me out," he said quickly. Jenna's pause was palpable. Braden, that doesn't make any sense. You need to tell the police everything. Are you sure? Braden's voice cracked slightly. Jenna was firm. Yes, go to the police. Explain about the house. It's the best way to clear your name. Braden chewed his lip, nodding even though Jenna couldn't see. Okay, I'll do it. It's just all so weird. Jenna's reply was swift. I know, but you've got nothing to hide. This might help. At the police station, Braden spoke earnestly, his words tumbling out. The house looked abandoned. No signs of Mrs. Whitlock or anyone else living there. Furniture covered in sheets, no sounds, nothing. It's like walking into a ghost house. The officer raised an eyebrow, scribbling notes. Braden continued, describing each detail, hoping it painted the eerie picture he'd witnessed. He described the sheets draping over chairs, the dust motes dancing in the stale air, the absolute silence that pressed against his ears. It was different from when I dropped her off. Back then, it felt lived in, real. The officer nodded slowly, his pen pausing over the notepad. Braden's gaze was earnest, desperate for them to understand the stark contrast he'd experienced. Braden, you need to make sure they understand how different it was, Jenna said over the phone later that evening. It's important. This could really prove you didn't take anything, that maybe this is all some big mistake or mix-up. Braden sighed, feeling the weight of her words. Yeah, I'm going back tomorrow. I have to make sure they get it right. Jenna's encouragement echoed in his mind as he planned his next steps. Standing outside the police station, Braden hesitated. He chewed on his lip, considering Jenna's advice. The idea of walking back in there twisted his stomach into knots. He worried it might make things worse, casting more doubt on his story. Shaking his head, Braden turned away from the station, deciding against going in. He needed another opinion, someone he could really trust. Instead of following Jenna's advice immediately, Braden drove home. He needed to talk to someone who knew him better than anyone, his mother. The drive felt longer than usual, each red light a moment to second-guess his decisions. As he pulled into the driveway, his hands were shaky on the steering wheel, but he felt a wave of relief seeing his home welcoming him. Braden walked through the front door, finding his mother in the kitchen. The smell of dinner cooking was comforting. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. Mom, we need to talk, he started, his voice tight with anxiety. His mother turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression shifting to concern as she nodded for him to continue. In the living room, Braden paced back and forth as he spoke. The house was empty, everything covered up like a ghost town, he explained, gesturing wildly. His mother listened, her brow furrowed. Braden stopped pacing, looking at her. I need to figure this out, he said, more to himself than to her. He took a deep breath, steeling himself to lay everything out clearly. Mom, do you think I should go back to the police? Tell them about the house again? Braden asked, looking for reassurance. His mother considered, her eyes thoughtful. Braden waited, hoping she'd have the answer. He trusted her judgment more than anyone's and knew she would steer him right. He needed her perspective on whether to engage further or find another way to clear his name. Braden's mother listened intently as he spilled out the events of the day, her eyes never leaving his face. He told her about the police showing up at their door, the accusations of theft, and his visit to the station. He moved around the living room as he spoke, his hands animated, his voice rising and falling with each detail. After Braden finished, his mother remained silent for a moment, absorbing everything. Then she leaned forward, her voice calm and steady. Braden, I need you to be completely honest with me about everything that happened today. Did you do anything that might have been misunderstood? Her question was direct but gentle, seeking clarity from him. Braden met his mother's gaze squarely. "Mom, I swear I didn't do anything wrong. I only helped Mrs. Whitlock because she was struggling in the rain." His voice was firm, resolute. He repeated the story he had told the police, emphasizing how he had immediately left after helping her to her porch. He explained further, "I only walked with Mrs. Whitlock to her porch to make sure she was safe. Once she thanked me, I left straight away. I didn't even step inside her house." His mother nodded, processing his words. Braden hoped his detailed account would help her understand the sincerity of his actions. His mother's response came warmly, filled with conviction. "Braden, I believe you. I know you were just trying to be kind." Her words washed over him like a comforting breeze. She reached out, squeezing his hand. "You have my complete support, no matter what. We'll get through this together." Her unwavering belief in him bolstered his spirits. Relieved by his mother's unwavering belief in his innocence, Braden felt a surge of strength. Her conviction bolstered his resolve as he sat next to her on the couch. "We'll figure this out together," she assured him, her voice full of determination. Braden nodded, feeling the weight of the situation lighten slightly with her support. "I'll help you in every way I can to clear your name," his mother promised, her eyes locking with his. She was ready to fight, her stance firm and protective. Braden felt a renewed sense of hope as they sat at the kitchen table, planning their next steps. "We'll start first thing tomorrow," she added, her resolve as strong as her words. Together, they brainstormed potential strategies to prove Braden's innocence. They laid out sheets of paper, scribbling down every idea that came to mind. "What about talking to the neighbors? Or finding security footage?" Braden suggested, eager to explore every avenue. His mother nodded, adding her own thoughts, each idea building on the last. As they discussed, the idea of revisiting the Whitlock house came up. "Maybe there's something we missed," Braden mused, tapping his pen against the notepad. His mother looked thoughtful. "It could be risky, but it might be worth it if we find something helpful," she reasoned. They agreed to take that risk, hoping the house might still hold clues to the truth. Braden's mother reassured him once more. "No matter what happens, I'm with you through all of this." Her words were firm, filled with a mother's protective love. Braden felt grateful for her support, knowing it would make all the difference. They prepared for the next day, ready to face whatever challenges might come, united in their efforts to uncover the truth. Braden and his mother sat at the computer, typing in search terms to dig up information about the Whitlocks. They sifted through various websites and forums, hoping to find something that could shed light on Mrs. Whitlock's claims. Braden focused on the screen, clicking through pages, while his mother jotted down any potentially useful details. During their search, Braden clicked on a link that led to Mr. Whitlock's obituary. The page loaded, revealing details of his life, his contributions to the community, and the legacy he left behind. Braden read aloud the accolades and the date of his passing, which seemed to conflict with some of Mrs. Whitlock's statements about her husband. Intrigued by the obituary, Braden and his mother discussed what this new information could mean. If he passed away years ago, how could Mrs. Whitlock's story about recent events hold up? Braden questioned, looking over at his mother. They reviewed the timeline of events Mrs. Whitlock had provided, noting the discrepancies and how they might affect her claims. "Maybe we should check the city archives for more about their history," his mother suggested after a pause. She explained that older, more detailed records might not be online, and a trip to the archives could uncover significant information. Braden nodded in agreement, excited about the possibility of discovering something concrete. They began to plan their trip to search for records that might provide clarity or new leads on the Whitlocks. Braden pulled up the archive's website to check the hours and any special requirements for visitors. His mother made a list of what they needed to bring and what specific records to request. They were determined to leave no stone unturned in their quest for the truth. The next day, Braden, his mother, and Jenna piled into the car, driving toward the city archives. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful as they navigated the morning traffic. They discussed what they might find, each offering different theories about the Whitlocks. As they parked near the archive building, they gathered their notes and prepared to dive into the past. Upon arrival, they walked into the cool, quiet lobby of the archives and approached the front desk. Braden took the lead, explaining to the clerk that they were looking for any files related to the Whitlock family. His mother and Jenna stood by his side, scanning the interior of the building, its walls lined with historical photographs and maps. The clerk, a middle-aged man with glasses perched on his nose, typed into his computer, searching the archive's system. After a few moments, he nodded. "Just give me a few minutes to retrieve the files from the back." He disappeared through a door marked "Staff Only," leaving Braden, his mother, and Jenna in anticipation. As they waited, Braden, his mother, and Jenna found seats in a small waiting area with wooden benches. They whispered among themselves, speculating on what the files might reveal. Braden tapped his foot nervously on the polished floor, his eyes fixed on the staff door through which the clerk had vanished. The clerk soon appeared at the door to the stacks, signaling to them that he would be back shortly with the files. He turned and disappeared among the tall shelves that housed countless documents of the city's past. Braden, his mother, and Jenna watched his retreating back, their hearts racing with the hope that they were about to uncover something pivotal. After a brief wait, the clerk returned with only a thin file in his hands, looking puzzled. He approached Braden, his mother, and Jenna with a slight frown. "I'm sorry, this is all I could find under the Whitlock name," he explained, handing over the slim folder. His confusion was evident, matching the trio's growing curiosity and concern. He apologized again, explaining, "It seems some of the documents may have been removed or misplaced. It's unusual for files to just disappear, especially ones that are public record." Braden exchanged a look with his mother and Jenna, their surprise mirroring his own. They took the file, a mix of disappointment and intrigue settling over them. Surprised by the lack of information, Braden and his companions accepted the file. They flipped it open briefly to glance at the sparse contents, hoping for at least some clues. "We'll need to go through this carefully," Braden murmured, his mind racing with questions about what was missing and why the file was so bare. As they walked to a nearby table, Braden, his mother, and Jenna wondered aloud who could have cleared out the Whitlock files and why. Could someone else be looking into the Whitlocks? Jenna pondered, her brow furrowed. Or maybe someone wanted to keep things hidden, his mother suggested, adding a layer of intrigue to their search. The clerk's revelation about the missing documents added another layer of mystery to their investigation. They sat down at a table with the file, all feeling the weight of the unknown. "This just gets stranger," Braden said, flipping open the folder once more. They prepared to sift through the few papers they had, each page potentially holding a key to understanding the larger puzzle. Braden and his group settled at a table in the quiet corner of the archives. They laid out the thin file, opening it with a mix of anticipation and skepticism. As they flipped through the sparse documents, a sealed envelope fell out, catching Braden off guard. It had his name written in elegant cursive across the front, adding a personal twist to their search. Inside the file, nestled between two old receipts, was the envelope with Braden's name. His mother and Jenna leaned closer, their eyes wide with curiosity. "That's odd," his mother whispered, echoing the surprise of the group. Braden picked up the envelope, the weight of it substantial in his hands, signaling that it held more than just paper. With hands trembling slightly from the unexpected discovery, Braden carefully tore open the envelope. Jenna and his mother watched in silence, the air around them thick with anticipation. As he pulled out the contents, their eyes were fixed on the papers that could potentially hold answers or more questions. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper, a letter. Braden unfolded it, his eyes quickly scanning the handwritten lines. The letter was concise, directing him to a specific address, a place they had never heard of before. "What could be there?" Jenna murmured, her voice low and full of wonder. The trio sat back, stunned, pondering the implications of this personal message to Braden. They exchanged glances, each face reflecting a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Why would my name be on this?" Braden asked aloud, more to himself than to anyone else. The specific instruction to visit an unknown address only deepened the mystery surrounding their investigation. The letter inside the envelope was explicit, directing Braden to visit a grand mansion located at the city's edge. He read the address aloud, the mystery deepening with each syllable. The letter provided no further explanation, only the cryptic instruction. Braden, Jenna, and his mother exchanged a look of bewildered curiosity, the letter's formality adding gravity to their next steps. Initially, Braden's mother expressed skepticism about following the mysterious instructions. This could be someone's idea of a joke, or worse, a trap, she cautioned, eyeing the letter warily. Braden understood her concerns, but the intrigue of the letter tugged at him. Jenna bit her lip, clearly torn between caution and curiosity, mirroring the conflicting emotions in the car. Despite her reservations, Braden's mother agreed to leave the archives to discuss their next move. They thanked the clerk, who gave them a curious nod, still puzzled by the scanty contents of their file. Heading out into the crisp air, they walked to their car parked under the shade of an old oak tree, the day seeming to hold a breath of suspense. Once in the car, Braden pulled out his phone to look up the address mentioned in the letter. The mansion was located in an older, secluded part of the city, known for its sprawling estates and shrouded in local lore. They discussed the potential risks of heading to an unknown place, based on an anonymous letter, but also the possibility of it leading to important revelations. After a spirited discussion, curiosity won over caution, and they decided to investigate the mansion. "There's only one way to find out what this is all about," Braden said, starting the engine. His mother nodded, her expression firming with resolve. Jenna looked between them, excitement sparking in her eyes. They were driven by the need to understand the origin of the letter and its mysterious summons. The drive to the mansion was contemplative, with Braden, his mother, and Jenna discussing the broader implications of the mysterious invitation. "What does this mean for us?" Braden's mother asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and caution. They each shared their thoughts, the car filled with theories and what-ifs, as they navigated the busy streets leading out of the city. "Why me?" Braden wondered aloud, focusing on why the letter specifically named him. Jenna offered, "Maybe it's something to do with your help to Mrs. Whitlock. Or perhaps it's something entirely unrelated that we haven't considered." They pondered various scenarios, each more intriguing than the last, considering who might be waiting at the mansion and what their motives could be. As they drove further from the city, the landscape changed dramatically. Tall buildings gave way to expansive views of lush, dense forest. The road curved gently through the verdant greenery, with sunlight dappling through the leaves. They admired the peaceful scenery, a stark contrast to the tension of their mission, the forest acting as a serene backdrop to their complex conversation. Upon arriving, they were greeted by an impressive sight: an open gate leading to a long, winding driveway lined with ancient trees. The mansion loomed in the distance, grand and somewhat foreboding. Braden drove through the gate, his hands tightening on the wheel as they approached the stately home, the gravel crunching softly beneath the car's tires. As they pulled up to the mansion's grand entrance, a man stood waiting, his posture rigid and formal. His presence heightened their anticipation and curiosity about what lay ahead. The man's suit was impeccably tailored, and he watched their approach with a calm, measured gaze. Braden parked the car, his heart pounding with the suspense of their unknown reception. As Braden stepped out of the car, a butler approached them gracefully. "Welcome. I am Alfred." He introduced himself with a polite nod. Alfred's demeanor was calm and collected, adding an air of formality to their arrival. He motioned for them to follow him, leading the way into the mansion with a practiced ease that spoke of many years in service. Alfred led them through the ornate hallways of the mansion to a cozy sitting room where Mrs. Whitlock and an older man awaited. The room was elegantly furnished, and the air was heavy with anticipation. Mrs. Whitlock, looking much more composed than their last encounter, greeted them warmly. The older man stood quietly beside her, observing Braden with keen interest. Once everyone was seated, the older man cleared his throat and began to speak. "Braden, we've learned that you are a distant relative of the late Mr. Whitlock," he revealed, his voice firm yet kind. Braden listened, taken aback by this unexpected connection to the Whitlock family, his mind racing to piece together this new information. Mrs. Whitlock then took over the conversation. "I was asked by a dear friend of Mr. Whitlock to assess your character discreetly," she explained. "The late Mr. Whitlock wanted his fortune to go to a family member who not only needed the help, but who would also use it to make a difference." Her tone was sincere, her eyes searching Braden's for understanding and perhaps approval. "You stand to inherit the Whitlock fortune," the older man continued, "provided you commit to using it benevolently." Braden felt a surge of both excitement and responsibility. He looked at his mother and Jenna, who were equally astounded. The room filled with a profound sense of possibility and the weight of the legacy he could continue.